Hello and welcome to the last lecture of module number 1, Introduction to Design Thinking, of the online course Design Thinking for Engineers. So in this last lecture, last lecture of module 1, I'll be talking about the basic steps involved in design thinking. As I told you earlier, design thinking doesn't have any steps, but then we can break it down into 5 steps in the entire process. Actually, it can be included. Another step can be included here. It's called implement, which is the final step of design thinking process. So the first step of design thinking is empathize, which means that you need to connect with the people. The second is define. If you haven't defined properly, you need to go back to empathize. And the next is ideate. If you haven't ideated properly, go back to definition. You need to prototype. If your prototype is not proper, again start with empathize or go back to ideate. If your test is not proper, go back to prototype. So the last step is implement. So these are the basic 6 steps in design thinking. The last step is actually not because it's rarely seen as a process of design thinking. Implement is not taken as a last step of design thinking, and these are the 5 steps that will be covered in the next 5 modules. Each module is of 1 hour of content. So empathize is going to be 1 hour, and each and every step after that is going to be for 1 hour. And in this I'll just explain about the basics of each and every step. Empathize: the work you do to understand people within your design challenge. The big question is how to empathize. Empathy is the region between the designer and the user. The designer must empathize, must create an empathy for the user. As I told you earlier, you need to put your legs into their boots. It calls for an human centered approach that takes into account all the technology considerations along with the human factor. The problems a design thinker tries to solve are not their own. The designer must think of the problems of the user. And how to empathize? You need to first observe, listen, engage. You need to see their world and not yours. You need to appreciate them as human beings first. Understand their feelings and communicate your understanding. If your understanding is not proper, again try to understand their feelings. The next step after empathy is definition or defining the problem. So how do you define the problem? At the defining stage of process, it is all about bringing clarity and establishing focus on design. This will help you explore more ideas quickly. Only if you can define a problem, you can come back to the you can go to the next step. And if your definition is not proper, you need to go back to the empathy stage. So it's important to define a problem first. To define a problem statement of the brief, it must be brief, articulative, and have a point of view of the following elements. That is, the user, the need, and the insight. And how can it be done? Through storytelling, through clustering the ideas, creating a persona for yourself, and using different frameworks by which you can finally create a point of view. So this is how you define a problem first, and then you need to go to the next step, which is ideate. What is ideation? Ideation is nothing but a simple process by which you can come up with solutions to the problems. It's a process of idea generation. It starts from concepts and goes to outcomes. If your ideation is not proper, you need to go back to the previous step of designing. And if your design is not proper, you need to again go back to the previous step of empathy. So the question is how to ideate. Coming up with a smart idea is easy, but ideation requires the broadest range of ideas. We don't want you to come up with the right solution. We want you to come up with a variety of solution, and each and every solution must be prioritized. After prioritizing, You need to try out each and every solution and then come up with the proper solution. We don't want the best, we don't want the correct solution or the 100% right solution. We want the best solution here. So ideation is about pushing for the widest possible range of ideas that are open to you and that can be executed first. And how do you ideate? You first eliminate the bad and amplify the good. You explore the opposites and the question. I guess you remember the reverse brainstorming session. And you analyze and identify the unexpected resources. In a lot of projects, you would have encountered several issues. It might be expected, whereas some might be unexpected, right? So these unexpected ones must be foreseen, must be forecasted in the process of design thinking. And how are they done? By sketching, by body storming, and by mind mapping. So these are the 3 steps by which you can ideate. Now what's the next step? Is prototype. Prototype basically means building the solution. So in prototyping, the whatever ideas that you are done on paper is going to be done as a product, which is going to be a hardware or a software. It's going to be converted to a product. So a question is how a prototype should look like. It's an iterative generation of artifacts intended to answer long questions that get closer to your final solution. The trick is keep sailing steady. You need to keep sailing steady. Just like a picture is worth 1,000 words, a prototype is worth 1,000 picture. Then imagine how much worth a prototype is. So how should a prototype look like? You must first prototype it, review it, refine it, and again come back to prototyping. So it should look like exactly like the idea on your paper. The closer your prototype is, the better will be the design solution. So this is how a prototype should look like. It should be crisp and clear and focused towards the solution. So the next step is, which I told you is the test, and followed by which is the implementation of the solution. So in testing, you give the solution to the you give your solution, the product you have prototyped, to the customer or the people, and then you need to ask them for reviews. For example, I'll show you in the next few modules about how the testing happens. I guess it would be there in the last module. And the question is how to make the execution work. So this is the phase during which the production specifications are finalized and the designs are given the shape of reality. So the implementation phase also accounts for testing the functionality as well as the visual appearance. So how do you make the execution work? You go to the customer, and if he is going to answer with I don't need this, where will you go? You'll go back to the empathy stage, the very first stage. If he is partially satisfied, you go back to the ideate or design stage or the prototype stage. So depending upon the satisfaction of the customer, you go back those many steps behind. It begins with testing and analysis of the completed design, but it's an iterative process. It's not the final solution that you have come up with. It's an iterative process. It must be tested, measured, reflected. So these are the several steps in the design thinking process. The last step is feedback. As I told you, the testing is before implementing. You need to go back to your lab, start working on your project again, refine it according to the needs of the comments of the user or the consumer, and then you need to come back to the consumer, show your new model, ask him to review it now, again go back to your lab, review it, refine it, come back for review. It's going to be a iterative process. So this is an entire feedback system. So how do you identify the key points in it? Sit together and deduce what aids the feedback process and how to strengthen the relationship with the client. These three steps will work: dialogue, enhancement, and reiteration. So these are the three tips that would work when interacting with a client. So the feedback capture grid looks somewhat like this. It will be about the questions he asked or the questions you asked to the client, the likes of the client, the criticism of the client, or the ideas the client already has. For example, if you are going to ask your mom a particular problem she faces in her daily life, she might have an idea or two regarding how you can solve the problem. So you need to consider those ideas of the client as well while prototyping your solution, or not prototyping, while ideating your solution. So at the last is the aha moment, when the best idea, when you ideate all your solution, you prototype all your solution and come up with the best one the consumer likes the most. The aha moment is the time when the results of convergent thinking and divergent thinking, analysis, problem definition, every step in the design thinking process comes to the best resolution is captured. At the aha moment, the process of design thinking begins to appear clear, which actually appears hazy and undirectional before the moment. So that is the last moment of design thinking process, before the final implementation of the project. So that's the end of the module 1, the introduction to design thinking. In the next module, I'll be explaining the various tools and techniques that you can use in the first process of design thinking, which is empathize. So maybe it's time to give you an assignment. This is going to be a single assignment, which will be graded at the end of your 6th module. You will be given a long time to work on your your project or whatever it is. So the assignment here is, okay, I'll leave it for the next module. Enjoy and have a great day.